In the armored stomach of a Mandalorian cruiser, while alarms flashed and crew members rushed to action stations on the decks above, a dozen Mandalorians waited silently, patiently for the drop. Their leader, his Beskar armor slathered with crimson paint, sat patiently toward the front of the hold, his droid fidgeting impatiently beneath him, a churning mass of tubes and armor bristling with weapons. The rider was more patient, sitting motionlessly, waiting for the order to be given, for the great last battle to begin. Hello and welcome to our latest series. Today we're going to be looking at another of the bloodiest battles in the history of the Star Wars galaxy, looking for insights into the soldiers who fought and died in them, with the goal of understanding the worst day of these beings' lives, and in many cases, the last day of these beings' lives. In this video, we're going to be delving into one of the most destructive wars of the Old Republic era, the Mandalorian Wars, and recounting the story of its terrible final battle, in which both the Mandalorians and their Republic foes were all but destroyed. The Battle of Malachor 5. The Mandalorians of old had a prophecy, predicting a battle they called Anila Akan, the Great Last Battle. This battle would be the Mandalorians' ultimate fight, the climax of their endless wars, a battle greater than any they had ever fought before and any they would ever fight again. A glorious, honorable battle that would see those who fought in it immortalized in history. For millennia, the Mandalorians longed for the day when this battle would be fought, and as the Mandalorian Wars began in 3976 BBY, many Mandalorians believed that the day was fast approaching. Just 30 years prior, the Mandalorian Crusaders had been utterly defeated in the Great Sith War, scattered and left leaderless after the death of Mandalore the Indomitable. But before long, a new Mandalore arose on Duxon, Mandalore the Ultimate, and the clans flocked to his banner, regrouping and rebuilding their strength. In the years that followed, the Mandalorian clans would rebuild, and at the urging of the new Mandalore, they reformed their ways as well. They became the Neo-Crusaders, following a new Mandalorian paradigm that organized the clans into proper armies rather than nomadic raider bands, and they began actively recruiting beings of all species into their ranks. The ranks of the Neo-Crusaders swelled with new recruits, and by 3976 BBY, the Mandalorians were strong enough to begin a new campaign of conquest. Over the course of the next few years, they carved out a huge swath of the galaxy for themselves on the northeastern fringe of the galaxy, conquering thousands of planets. Every world they conquered became part of the Mandalorian war machine, and the people on those planets were given a choice. They could become Mandalorian, or they could die. Consequently, the numbers of Mandalorians grew into the billions. These conquests were just the prelude to the real war, however. The Mandalorians' ultimate aim was to challenge the Republic, and by extension, the Jedi. They wanted to conquer the galaxy, topple its 20,000-year-old government, and vanquish the galaxy's most renowned warriors, leaving them utterly triumphant. In the process, the Mandalorians believed that such a war would lead them to the Anila Akan. For if the Mandalorians conquered the Republic, what battle could possibly surpass such an enormous victory? In 3964 BBY, the Mandalorians invaded the Republic, and the true Mandalorian Wars began. Over the course of the next 2 years, the Mandalorians won victory after victory, running roughshod over the Republic and scattering its armies. The Jedi Council at first refused to intervene, to the disappointment of the Mandalorians, but some members of the Order defied this decision and went to war anyway. Led by a pair of charismatic young knights named Revan and Malak, they joined the fight in 3962 BBY. Just as the Mandalorians breached the borders of the core worlds in the Battle of Duro, the battle was joined and the tide of the war slowly began to turn. Slowly but surely, Revan and his followers began to beat back the Mandalorians. Over the course of 2 grueling years, they wore down the Mandalorian war machine and drove the Neo-Crusaders back to the Outer Rim. This came at enormous cost. The Republic fleet was all but destroyed in the process, whittled down by a long series of costly victories. By 3960 BBY, both sides were on the verge of collapse. Their fleets were in tatters and their numbers were thin. The two sides had one last battle left in them, and this final battle was ultimately fought above Malachor 5, a remote world on the edge of known space. There, the two fleets tore into each other like beasts, fighting one last battle to decide the fate of the galaxy. Far above the ashen surface of Malachor 5, Mandalore's last great fleet made its move. Slab-sided behemoths, their hulls crusted with plasma scoring and rime, spat blood-hued plasma as they lumbered down into high orbit, closing on the Republic ships that waited there. A motley assortment of battle-worn hammerheads and arrowhead-shaped battlecruisers, each and all battered and bearing wounds inflicted by Mandalorian guns. Brilliant green cannon fire lanced out from the Republic vessels, splitting the night, scattering in ripples across the shields of the Mandalorian warships. Starfighters launched, swarming like insects, forming into squadrons and screens. In the drop bay of one of the great Mandalorian cruisers, a lance of warriors waited silently, perched atop their war droids, waiting for the drop. The blue paint of their Beskar shells was worn in places, scratched away by shrapnel or blaster burns. Trophies won on Altair 3, where they had the honor of leading the charge against the Jedi Lions, a charge very few Mandalorians had survived. The warriors were all strapped tightly to their basilisks, which themselves were suspended from the ceiling of the bay by magnetic locks, their long metal claws and spiked tails hanging limp above the bay doors. The droids were clusters of tubes, armor, and weaponry, faceless and pitiless, and some of them fidgeted anxiously beneath their riders, anticipating the onset of battle. The bay doors opened, and the air fell from the bay, scattered in space as crystals of frozen vapor which sparkled in the light of turbo laser fire below. Then, the magnetic locks on the basilisks disengaged, and a lance of Mandalorian warriors fell into space, falling freely toward Malachor 5, a vast orb of black hanging beneath them. The droids' thrusters fired, and the warriors were thrown back in the saddle by gravitational forces as the basilisks bore them into the fray. The point defense guns on one of the Republic cruisers opened fire, sending a spattering of energy bolts toward the lance of basilisk riders. Half of the lance was hit, and droid and rider alike were vaporized, becoming blossoms of flame before fading into nothing. The survivors scattered, their droids twisting and whirling to avoid the incoming fire, while their riders urged them on, fearlessly pressing the attack while energy bolts whizzed past them. With just a few centimeters of armor between them and the remorseless vacuum of space. Starfighters, Mandalorian and Republic alike, swarmed around them. A Republic Aurek broke from its squadron and bore down on the lead basilisk, but the droid's rider saw it coming and swerved to intercept it. The droid bore down on the fighter and tore into it with its claws, crumpling the barrels of its laser cannon and tearing off its cockpit, while the Mandalorian riding it drew his sidearm and fired on the pilot within. Beyond, one of the Republic battlecruisers stumbled as a flight of concussion missiles struck its starboard side, burrowing deep into its hull and wreaking havoc on the vessel's reactor. It plunged into Malachor's upper atmosphere, burning up with the heat of re-entry, becoming one of many fireballs, Republic and Mandalorian alike, that were raining down on the cursed planet below. The Mandalorians pressed on. The lead basilisk threw the crippled Aurek aside and made for one of the smaller Republic cruisers, unleashing a withering barrage of shatter missiles and laser fire, overwhelming its shields, burning away point defense turrets and stabilizers, digging blackened holes into the ship's hull. The droid's rider surveyed the battle, scanning over clouds of debris, swarms of fighters, and thickets of turbo laser fire. The carnage was mounting on both sides, but the Mandalorians were still pressing the offensive. And then there was a flash, brief but brilliant, and the universe began to shift. Capital ships, Republic and Mandalorian alike, were drawn off course, listing toward the planet below, slowly at first, but rapidly accelerating. The fighters and basilisks were not spared, and the lead basilisk rider felt gravity strengthen below him, battling against his droid's thrusters to draw him down into Malachor 5. The basilisk fought back, its joints whining as the pull grew stronger, soon overcoming its thrusters. The Mandalorian fell, the basilisk fell, and all around them, ships of all sizes were falling too. Below, Malachor itself was moving, its surface shifting, cracking, and sliding apart. The whole planet came undone, and the remnants were falling upwards, rising to meet the falling fleets. The pull grew stronger, capital ships began to come apart, and the Mandalorian felt himself beginning to stretch before unbearable pain crowded out every other thought in his mind, as the two fleets fell, crushed in gravity's fist. The fleet Revan had stationed above Malachor 5 had been bait. The Jedi General himself was waiting out system aboard another fleet, waiting to attack the Mandalorians from behind when they engaged the first. But Revan's trap had gone awry. He and his force had been delayed by Mandalorian scouts, and by the time they arrived to close the trap, the Mandalorians were on the verge of overcoming the first fleet. Even as Revan boarded the Mandalorian flagship and slew Mandalore the Ultimate, the first fleet's commander was left with no choice but to activate a weapon of last resort, the Mass Shadow Generator. This terrible weapon exploited gravitational anomalies in the Malachor system to destroy the Mandalorian fleet, crushing it into Malachor 5, which was ripped apart and reformed into a blasted, hellish wasteland. Much of the Republic fleet was caught in the blast too, destroyed with the Mandalorians. Jedi and Mandalorians alike were spaghettified, destroyed by the sheer force of gravity, and their dying screams would echo across the surface of Malachor 5 for years to come, turning the whole planet into a wound in the Force. Those Mandalorians who were left had no choice but to offer Revan their unconditional surrender. Revan ordered them to scrap their fleet and dismantle their beloved Basilisk war droids, and he took their armor and weapons as well. But worst of all, Revan took the Mask of Mandalore, which he had won from Mandalore the Ultimate after killing him. Revan hid the mask from the Mandalorians, preventing them from choosing a new leader, and as a result, even in the wake of the Mandalorians' most devastating defeat, the clans scattered, entering into petty feuds over who would lead. The strength of the Mandalorians, which just 2 years prior had seemed sufficient to topple the Republic, was utterly destroyed. The Battle of Malachor 5 was Anila Akan, the great last battle the Mandalorians had been searching for, but it was not the glorious victory they had believed it would be. Rather, Malachor was a death blow to the Mandalorian people, and in the millennia later, they would steadily decline. Several attempts would be made to return the Mandalorians to glory, but never again would the clans be strong enough to challenge the Republic, and never again would they fight a battle on the scale of Malachor 5. That does it for this video. But what do you think? What do you think of this series so far? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.